This is Unsolved Requiem. On the night of February 1st, 1959, 9 experienced hikers camped on the eastern slope of a mountain in the northern Ural range of the Soviet Union. By morning, something had forced them to cut their way out of their tent from the inside. They fled into the Siberian darkness. Some were barefoot, some wore only thin undergarments. The temperature had fallen to nearly minus 30 degrees Celsius. None of them survived. And more than 6 decades later, no explanation fully satisfies what happened on that mountain. The mountain was known locally as Kalat Sayakal. In the language of the indigenous Mansi people, its name translates to something unsettling, Mountain of the Dead. But in 1959, that name was little more than folklore. For Igor Dyatlov and his group of fellow students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, it was simply another challenging winter expedition. They were not amateurs. Most were experienced Grade 3 hikers, the highest certification available in the Soviet Union at the time. They had trained in extreme cold. They had navigated remote wilderness. They had endured blizzards. This was supposed to be a test of endurance, not a death sentence. The group originally consisted of 10 members, but one of them, Yuri Yudin, turned back early due to severe joint pain. That decision would save his life. The remaining 9 pressed forward. Igor Dyatlov, the leader. Zinaida Kolmogorova, Lyudmila Dubinina, Rustam Slobodin, Alexander Kolevatov, Georgy Krivonashenko, Yuri Doroshenko, Nikolai Thibeaux-Brignoles, and Semyon Zolotaryev, the oldest of the group, a 38-year-old war veteran. They were intelligent, disciplined, and physically capable. Their diaries and photographs show laughter, snow-covered forests, camaraderie. Nothing suggested fear. Nothing suggested danger. On January 31st, they reached the edge of a highland area. The following day, February 1st, worsening weather reduced visibility. Instead of descending into a nearby forested valley for shelter, Dyatlov made a decision. They would camp on the slope of the mountain, exposed, open, vulnerable to wind. That choice remains one of the most debated aspects of the case. By early evening, they had erected their tent. The slope was angled, so they cut into the snowpack to create a flat surface. They secured the tent. They settled inside, they ate, they wrote in their journals. They prepared to sleep. And at some point during the night, something happened. Search efforts did not begin immediately. When the group failed to send a scheduled telegram upon completing the route, there was initial assumption of delay. Winter expeditions often ran behind schedule. But as days passed, families grew concerned. By February 20th, search teams were mobilized. Students, volunteers, eventually military units. On February 26th, the tent was discovered, partially buried in snow, collapsed, and cut open from the inside. The cuts were deliberate. Investigators later confirmed that the fabric had been slashed internally, not torn by wind, not shredded by animals. Someone inside that tent had chosen to escape quickly. But why? Inside, boots remained. Coats remained. Personal belongings were neatly arranged. Food was untouched. The stove was assembled but unused. There were no signs of struggle, no signs of external attack. Outside the tent, investigators found footprints. Bare footprints, sock-covered footprints, leading downhill toward the forest, nearly 1.5 kilometers away. The tracks suggested walking, not running. And then they disappeared under drifting snow. The first 2 bodies were found beneath a cedar tree at the edge of the forest. Doroshenko and Krivonashenko. They were barefoot, wearing only underwear. The branches of the cedar were broken up to 5 meters high, suggesting someone had climbed it. A small fire had been built nearby. The remains of burned branches lay in the snow. The 2 men had died of hypothermia. Their skin showed minor burns, as if they had been close to flames, or perhaps exposed to something else. Between the cedar tree and the tent, 3 more bodies were discovered. Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, Slobodin. They appeared to have been attempting to return to the tent. Each collapsed at different distances along the slope. All 3 died of hypothermia. But Slobodin had a fractured skull. not fatal on its own, but unexplained. There were no signs of combat, no defensive wounds, no evidence of assault, just injuries that did not align neatly with exposure alone. Months later, when the snow began to melt, the remaining 4 bodies were discovered in a ravine deeper within the forest. They were found beneath several meters of snow. These deaths were different. Dubinina and Zolotaryov had severe chest fractures. Thibaut Brignoles had massive skull trauma. The force required to cause such injuries was compared to that of a car crash. Yet there were no external wounds consistent with a physical attack, no broken skin, no obvious bleeding. It was described as blunt force trauma without external damage. And then there was Lyudmila Dubinina. Her tongue was missing. Part of her lips were gone. Facial tissue was absent. Some interpreted this as mutilation. Later analysis suggested post-mortem animal scavenging and natural decomposition in a running stream environment. But in 1959, it only deepened the horror. Even more unsettling was the discovery of elevated radiation levels on some of the clothing. Not extreme, but measurable. This sparked speculation of military testing. Secret weapons, parachute mines, Cold War experimentation. The Soviet Union was not transparent. The investigation was conducted quickly. The official conclusion, issued in May 1959, stated that the hikers died due to a compelling natural force. The case was closed. Files were archived, and the mountain kept its silence. So what could have caused 9 experienced hikers to cut their tent open and flee into deadly cold? The most widely accepted explanation today is avalanche, specifically a slab avalanche, not a massive snowslide, but a compacted slab of snow breaking loose beneath the tent. Modern simulations suggest that wind-driven snow accumulation could have destabilized the slope hours after they camped. A sudden shift could have caused partial collapse. Fear of a larger avalanche might have driven them out immediately. That would explain urgency. It would explain leaving belongings behind. But there are problems. The slope angle was relatively shallow. No significant debris was found. Footprints remained visible, which suggests no major avalanche swept through. And experienced hikers would likely recognize the difference between minor snow shift and catastrophic slide. Still, recent Russian reinvestigations in 2020 officially reaffirmed avalanche as the cause. But not everyone agrees. Another theory involves infrasound. Wind passing over the mountain's shape could create low-frequency sound waves. Infrasound is known to induce anxiety, panic, and irrational behavior in humans. Perhaps a natural resonance triggered overwhelming fear, causing them to flee in confusion. But infrasound does not break bones. It does not explain blunt trauma. It does not account for radiation. Then there is the military theory. The Ural region was used for secret testing. Some speculate that parachute mines detonated nearby. These airburst devices create pressure waves capable of causing internal injuries without external wounds. That would align with chest fractures. It would align with sudden panic. But there is no confirmed record of such tests in that location at that time. And while secrecy was common, absolute concealment across decades is difficult to sustain. Some propose conflict within the group, a fight, a breakdown of cohesion. But diaries show no tension. Autopsies showed no signs of violent struggle among them. And why would conflict lead them to flee half-dressed into freezing darkness? That explanation fails to satisfy. The radiation remains ambiguous. One member had previously worked at a nuclear facility. Contamination could have been incidental. Levels were not high enough to suggest direct exposure to weapons. But in the Cold War atmosphere of 1959, even small readings fueled paranoia. Perhaps the most disturbing element is psychological. When faced with extreme stress, humans do not always act rationally. A perceived threat, avalanche, sound, unknown event, could have triggered immediate evacuation. Once outside, disorientation and hypothermia set in quickly. At minus 30 degrees, survival without shelter is measured in minutes. Judgment fades, coordination declines. Paradoxical undracing can occur in late-stage hypothermia. confusion becomes fatal. In that scenario, injuries sustained later, falls into the ravine, collapsing snow bridges, could explain the blunt trauma. The group becomes separated. Some attempt fire. Some attempt return. Some seek deeper shelter. One by one, they succumb. It is tragic. It is plausible. And yet, there remains something unsettling. Because even when piecing together avalanche models, environmental stress, and human error, the sequence still feels fractured, incomplete. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the case. Advanced forensic analysis, topographical modeling, computer simulations. The final conclusion again pointed toward avalanche combined with hypothermia. Case closed. Again. But for many, the mountain still feels unresolved, because the evidence does not tell a clean story. It tells fragments, footprints in snow, a tent cut open, broken ribs without bruising, a missing tongue, radiation traces, a file stamped closed. Perhaps the truth is less dramatic than the legend. Perhaps it was a chain of unfortunate natural events: weather, snow instability, darkness, cold, human miscalculation. But tragedy does not need conspiracy to be haunting. 9 young lives ended on a silent slope, no survivors. No final explanation from those who were there. Only the wind, only the snow, only a mountain whose name in hindsight feels prophetic. Mountain of the dead. In the end, what remains is not certainty, but atmosphere, a frozen campsite, a line of footprints descending into darkness, and a question that still echoes through the Urals. What happened that night? This has been Unsolved Requiem.